All right. I do expect more coaches to come. I heard from a number of them this week. So I don't know if time is a factor, but in terms of time of night, but let's get started and then we'll see kind of, who shows. This has been up here the whole time, but just quick wanted to go over this. When you first enter, stay muted. You guys have done that. Great. Thank you. Cameras off if we feel there's any lagging issues. Right now, there doesn't seem to be with anything. If you guys have your cameras on, that's okay. Tonight discussion is a collective group effort. Just want it to be less about grandstanding so that we can really avoid people trying to come and make a name for themselves or whatever it might be. I want this to be a really collective effort on all of our behalves to just kind of grow with each other and help each other grow. And then I'll do my best to include as many coaches as possible. Right now, there's only 8 participants, so I think depending on the flow of the conversation, I think most of you should be able to talk or share out tonight, which I would love. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here. If you don't get a chance to share as much as you'd like, there's a questionnaire, and I'll show you that in a moment, that I'd love for you guys to take afterwards, and I'll show you kind of what it is and why it's out there. And then just lastly, be professional at all times, please, as much as possible. Don't think that's going to be an issue. So everything that we have here tonight is on longandtriple.com. It's right here. Once you hit that button there, it'll bring you to this presentation. Now, the survey I was discussing, it is right here. And basically, it just asks some questions. It asks you for your email address. It asks if it would be okay for other coaches to contact you or not. So for instance, I already filled in my stuff. If a coach, one of you, is looking through this and sees an answer that really resonates with you or something that you'd like to talk to me more about, and you see that you can contact me by email, I don't want this all just to have to run through me. So let's say there's 2 or 3 of you that want to talk, email this week back and forth and share thoughts and ideas without being in this Zoom session. I mean, that's what this is all about. So I just want to start, collecting email addresses for communication purposes, as well as so that you guys can, communicate with each other. The ways that I've put this presentation out so far, like mostly from the Coaches Collab on Facebook. If that's where you saw this, there's a lot of postings on there, so sometimes things get buried, and so I just want to keep everyone up to date, basically. And then one last thing, if we get booted off this, because I think that I only have a 40-minute presentation time on Zoom, if we get booted, if you go to the longandtriple.com and click on the link I just showed you or the tab, we'll just start another one in my personal meeting room. So you'll just click on this if we get booted, okay? Because I don't want to lose you guys. We'll kind of go from there. And if you have any questions anytime, please use the chat. We're going to be using that a lot tonight as well to just kind of share out thoughts and stuff. So when I first began coaching, I knew nothing. The approach was something that really, really, really confused me. And since then, I've become very, very passionate about the approach and the start specifically. And I learned a lot from other coaches and my own athletes. Without them, I would have had a great deal of difficulty. And to keep the tradition of learning from athletes, I invited one of my prior athletes, Casey Walker-Daniels, who now jumps for Stevens Point here in Wisconsin. And she's going to introduce herself in a moment. But I think it's really important that in these presentations, if we can, we maybe try to find some athletes that can give their opinions as well, because I think that's really, really important. I don't think that we sometimes maybe give the floor to athletes as much as we should and hear their side of things, and they're the ones that are actually going through it. And Casey's one of the first people I thought of, or probably the first person I thought of when I was like, we need to invite an athlete that, could really talk about some things. She's overly passionate, and it's very evident she's very, very, very knowledgeable in the sport. So, Casey, why don't you go and introduce yourself real quick here? You can unmute yourself, and then we'll move on from there.
Awesome. So, hey guys, can everybody hear me okay?
I can, Casey. You're good.
Good. Awesome. Here, go back to So I've been a track athlete for about 8 years now, and I've been a triple jumper since my freshman year of high school. I'm about to be a junior at UW-Stevens Point. You can see the picture on the left on this slide is the impeccable form from my first jump ever, which I am so glad that somebody got on video. It was about 28 feet long, and I remember I didn't know much going into that meet. Coach Ewing put me and two of my teammates in so we could try it out, get some experience. And I remember asking, an older, an upperclassman from a different school, actually. All I remember is he was really tall and he had long hair. What triple jump was, because I was kind of doubting myself in the moment. And he asked me what my dominant foot was. I said left, and he goes, all right, you're going to go left, left, right, and then into the pit.
Sorry. Keeps jumping on me.
And then that's what I did, and the results weren't fantastic, but I was excited about it. And I always liked to do the hard thing in high school. I think that's why in 8th grade I started as a 100 runner. I did long jump, high jump, and in high school it became apparent that the 400 and triple jump were more difficult, more challenging. So I wanted to reach for those, and I ended up making sort of a plan for myself. I thought that 28 feet is an interesting start to in a triple jump, and I wanted to make something of myself. So I wanted to make it to state by my senior year, and I came up with sort of a plan in my head. More like a goal with no way to get there. But fortunately, Coach Ewing is a fantastic coach, and I'd like to say he did most of the work, and he did the legwork for sure, getting me there. And during my high school career, I was given the honors of most improved, and I made it to state in 2018, which was my goal my senior year. And that was when I got a pretty large PR, my last jump ever of my high school career. I broke 36 feet for the first time, and I became 4th in school history, I think.
Yes.
Yes. And that was amazing for me. So my last meet of my high school career was what made me really want to continue my career in college. And I wanted to continue as a jumper. I made it to college, UW-Stevens Point, and I was recruited as a multi, doing the pentathlon and the heptathlon. After a couple months of that, it became apparent that I had a lot of potential for the event, but I really didn't enjoy some of them. I wasn't great at high jump. I wasn't great at shot put. Thank goodness I didn't have to learn how to do pole vault like the guy multis do. But I transitioned back to triple jump one meet when I asked my head coach if I could do it, and I ended up getting second at that meet, and that was towards the end of the season, my freshman year. And it kind of struck me like I haven't done triple jump in 9 or 10 months now, and I still have it, So I pushed for the rest of the season, the indoor season my freshman year. I got 8th place at the WIAC conference. Moving to outdoor, I got 4th during the outdoor season. And then sophomore year, this year, I got 3rd, which is a good improvement from 8th place. And the outdoor season, unfortunately, was canceled. But this season, I was actually given the honors again of being most improved. And now my PR is getting close to 38 feet. I haven't quite broken it, but I'm about in 2.5 inches from our school record. And I'm currently second in UWSP history for triple jump. And we're still moving up. So I'm happy to be here and hope to help.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Just as a side note, you guys, this is an athlete that she's obsessed. I mean, she drank the triple jump, track and field juice, if you will. So it's really good to have you here, Casey, and the progression that she's had. I think that really speaks to what I want to do in this group is, talk about how we can get athletes to develop such as she did through her high school experience, and then continue to grow as she has at the collegiate ranks, excuse me. So, really glad she's here. So, the format for this is going to kind of be the same. For every topic that we get through, and there's no rush to get through a topic. I have 5 different topics in this that I want to open the floor as much as humanly possible to you to talk about. And if we spend the whole night just talking about the start, and we keep the rest of this discussion, the second and third and fourth and so on topics for next week, I'm okay with that, because I want to, meet the needs of you all that are here, and talk as much as we can about specific topics that you're passionate about. So the first thing I'd love you to do, if you can in the chat, please, I would love to know what kind of start you coach. So do you coach a static start, one that has no movement prior to the beginning of the approach? Do you coach a start that is mostly static? And what I mean by that is there's some movement just prior to getting set to begin the approach. Do you coach a walk-in or a skip-in start? Or is there another type of approach that I'm not, mentioning there? If you're on a computer, if you hit Alt-H, that'll open up your chat box. Otherwise, you can go to the More settings. But I'd love to hear from some of you kind of the different approaches that you teach or you coach. Static. Okay, awesome.
Um,
Static for most beginners. Coach Gary. Allow more experienced athletes to do a walk-in. Gadsden, I always start with a static start. Good. Static start, crouch start. Okay, nice.
let me see.
So I'm seeing mostly kind of static starts. Cameron, do you want to talk about why you would go with more experienced athletes doing like a walk-in type of start? I'd love to hear that, or from you.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Well, the reason why I like to go that direction for athletes, if they want to, because occasionally you'll have an athlete who says that, hey, coach, can I try a run in or try a walk in or whatever? I think it helps get me motivated, or it helps improve my rhythm at the beginning. And I'll allow them to do it at that point if I'm comfortable that they can be consistent at the beginning of their run. I'll allow them to do it. But generally, I frown upon that, because I think it introduces too much variability, particularly for beginners. So I'd rather use a crouch or a static start for almost everybody. But there's always room for modifications and coaching the individual.
Definitely. No, I completely agree with that. That's great. Aaron Gadsden, you said that you also agree. Would you like to share your thoughts? If you want to mute yourself, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what was just said. Like, I think, the standing start is gonna be the most consistent kind of start. Like, when you add a skip in, like, you have to add essentially an extra point to start, right? So you got to figure out how far back I'm going to start my skip, and then I got to make sure that when I finish my skip for like my 0 step, it's got to hit in the exact same spot too. And so it creates like more variability and something extra for the athlete to kind of pay attention to. But I think that it can be helpful for some athletes that might not be as like power oriented in the start, because it helps to smooth out that transition from maybe like a lower position to being more upright. It's like a little bit easier for some athletes depending on what their kind of power output might be in the beginning of the run. So like I have like an advanced athlete that does a skip in start because I think she starts a little bit better in that position. But we also have a bunch of different marks that she has to pay attention to, which I wouldn't want to do for high school kids in general.
So are you talking for that athlete that does a skip in? Like, is it like an assistance in momentum getting started. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, I think that first step. Well, I think the first step in a static start is like the most important start. And so if like you mess that up, it can kind of mess up your rhythm. And so if you have that extra momentum, I think that's like why people kind of do like that, like a standing start, but you start with your kind of your arm back and then you roll into the start. It gives you a little bit more momentum on that zero step on that first push. So you can make that a little bit more rhythmic and a little bit more consistent. As opposed to like you rarely see a jumper do like a 3-point start and just like blast out, because that's going to be pretty like inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does anybody else want to share? The floor is open to any coaches or anyone that wants to share at all.
Along the same lines the coach is talking about, as far as not relying so much on power, is Willie Banks talks a lot about how when he was jumping, because everybody, thinks of Willie, they think of, the clap in and all that kind of stuff, and how he walk up and then run into the start. And Willie, he says that you guys don't understand that my run is only about 8 steps, but the rest of it is all that stuff to get him motivated and start his rhythm and to get him really moving. But he really considered his run to be 8 steps. So I wouldn't advise that personally, but that worked for him, and he jumped 59 feet. So I never jumped 59 feet. So there you go.
So decent distance, right?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Boo taught me to teach my kids to push out the back, but not expend all the energy out the back. So I teach them to give that push out the back, where they get in a semi crouch and just give that push out the back. So we've been comfortable going with the push, and my kids have been fairly successful. I've had a 38, a 39, and a 42-foot jumper. So we've been fairly successful with that, coming with that. So it's kind of worked, and I can't count steps because I have epilepsy. So, I just roll with that.
Okay. Great. Anyone else want to share any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is with the start is like I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Is that like depending on kind of your arousal level or like hype, if you will, like the start could change. And you see this a lot in high school. Sometimes it's like a big meter, kids get hyped up, and then they start pushing like really, really hard, like they've never pushed before, and then they end up fouling by a mile, or they get the clap and they foul by a mile or something like that. And so like I like the coach that you want to push out the back as hard as you can, but I think that the trouble with that sometimes can be is that people like get in this kind of like over pushing, like this almost like reachy kind of like pushy run. And so if people have trouble with that, that's why like I might put in like a skip in or a walk in to like make that transition upright a little bit easier. But like I think that for me, like I think that can be the biggest challenge is how do you make sure a kid is always pushing out hard but doesn't over push and hinder them from getting into an upright position when they get to the board.
And that's a great question, Aaron. An athlete came to mind actually while you were discussing this. His name was Caden, same grade level as Casey Walker Daniels. And the thing about him was the first approach was always on the board. And I maybe shouldn't say always, but I mean darn near, 95% of the time was nearly always on the board. And the thing about him is once he jumped, that energy was already there, right? But once he jumped, the energy got amped up because he was a phenomenal long jumper. And so when he went out there and did a big jump and put himself in contention to win pretty much any meet he was in, it would get him pumped up. And so by his third jump of prelims, generally speaking, because of that amped up, feeling of excitement, I generally had him go back a shoe, knowing that that could in fact be the difference. And I kept a lot of records on this, and I generally do during the season to keep track of where athletes are per jump. Like, are they always on that board their first jump? Are they always a shoe behind? And I like to really keep track of those specifics with athletes. I personally can't do them with all because we have a jumps team of 70 kids, but I mostly focus on the varsity level athletes when it comes to that, not trying to diminish the JV kids by any means. But that's how I try to keep track. And you're totally right. I mean, whether it's, they're jumping little meets all year and there's no competition, and they get to state and their arousal level is 10 times more than it's been all year. I mean, that's a very hard thing to, mimic in some of those regards. So that's a really good statement or question or thought, I should say.
But then if you practice 2 to 3 times a week and you know their tendencies and you've rehearsed and you've been in big meets and you've seen them and you know them and you do this all the time, then you can go with the flow, and the kid is so smooth. You can sort of control their emotions and pull them back. And that's what we did with our biggest jumper was Nicole Whitman. And we were able to pull her back, so that she got her big jump, her 40-foot jump. Then she went on the second jump. We knew she was going to go 41 at JO's, and we were able to stop the foul before it happened, and you can control that emotion. You can see that she might foul on the second attempt, but you know emotionally that she's all amped up, because you know the kids so well, because you practiced with them every day, so you know what's going on. Just because you practice every day and you see it coming.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand you there, but I think it also goes with the level of athlete. So you were just talking about a 41-foot triple jump girl, which is a phenomenal number. That girl is way more conditioned mentally and probably emotionally than, say, Casey, who made her first time to state senior year. And she was amped up as much as anybody else there, and you could see it on her face. And she's very good at controlling her emotions and still jumping consistently. But there's so many kids out there that even if you've done hundreds of approaches with them in a certain situation, I think definitely could throw some very weird different scenarios in the mix that, you didn't see coming or hoped wouldn't come, I guess I should say. But I do understand what you mean, that if you do enough approaches, at one point in time in my career, I heard that 70% of a track practice should be approaches for long and triple jumpers. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. We do a large number in high school on our team weekly, so that, they build that lane awareness and they can steer themselves a little bit. But I totally get what you're saying there.
Yeah, that's what we do, because that's all those girls that I was speaking of are girls from Illinois. And those were 3 girls that I coached in high school in Illinois. And they were just, as I call them, the dogs.
Okay.
Coach, if I may.
Yeah.
The other coach, I can't see her name. All I can see is her phone number. But
It's Pat Wilson.
I'm sorry.
It's Pat Wilson.
Okay, Coach Wilson. How did you deal with that with athletes when you get to certain big meets? Like, I coach high school and club kids and a couple, collegiate athletes, but when you get to a certain meet, you don't have that kind of contact sometimes. Maybe the athletes, gone to a bullpen area or whatever, and you can't be there with them. How do you deal with that in practice so that way they can manage it on their own when they get to the meet?
Oh, well, when we first get to the meet, the routine is that they still have to do their normal warm up. Before they go to the bullpen, the first thing is that we still do the normal competition warm up, and we rehearse that day after day. And it's one of those things that they are so disciplined that they know the deal. One of the things is that all our kids are fun loving but disciplined, and it's like, okay, we have this regular scripted kind of thing, and it's like, okay, I got to warm up. Now I got to get on the runway. I've got to put my mark down as soon as I warm up. So as soon as they warm up, they go put their mark down. So then, because they don't want a herd of people that over at the runway before coach can watch them do run-throughs. So I'm watching them do run-throughs before there are a ton of people over there, so that I can sit there and watch them do run-throughs, and we can have this silent, like, yeah, you're on. And our thing is they get 3 chances to do run-throughs, because we're not going to take a ton of run-throughs. And then 3, and what we do in practice is we will practice against the wind, with the wind, in all kinds of scenarios. And like I say, I can't give them steps, a number of steps, because I have epilepsy. So, you'll never hear me tell them 7 left or 6 left or anything like that, because that doesn't work with me. And so we'll tell them, we just have to put down a tape measure for a certain number of feet, and then I'll tell them move back 1 shoe or move up a shoe, something like that.
Got it.
We have everything scripted out, and it works. And I've been doing this I'm the graybeard, I guess, of the group. I've been doing this for about 40 years.
Oh, wow. Cameron, if you don't mind, I wanted to just interject something really quick that came to mind when she was talking about scripting, and you were asking about, how she gets her athletes ready for competitions where they might not be close to you. Something I started doing a few years back was creating videos using Screencastify, where I would go over weather conditions for the day. I would go over what they need to bring to the meet. I would do things of that nature and really get them mentally prepared. I would do it for the whole group, generally speaking, going to compete, as well as sometimes I would do it for individuals, especially at the state level. I would do videos for individuals to let them know, like, listen, knowing them, I know exactly what to say to them to make sure that they aren't just celebrating getting to state, or they're not letting the crowd play a factor in a negative way, because some kids get really freaked out when they go to state for the first time. So, scripting those things, going to big meets too prior, using, technology to get those things out and use those ways to send messages, I think is really great too.
Yeah. Oh, that's super important.
Okay.
You know, it's you got to. Like the first time that we went and ran in a sectional meet that was 37 degrees, we didn't let our kids run in tight because it was the first time that we had a chance to win the sectional. Now we scripted out a warm up that was 35 items. It was a continuous warm up, and the kids wore tights over their shorts, and they wore a sweatsuit. And by the time they got through warming up, they were sweating like all get up. And when they went to the starting line, they were ready. The other teams were still cold because they didn't warm up very well. And we whipped the dog mess out of the other team. And it taught us a lot about how you prepare. So you're very right about teaching the kids about how you prepare.
For sure. So I want to just make sure that I address some questions that we had earlier about the start, since that's our topic. I know we got a little off topic there, which is totally fine. That happens when we get passionate about our things that we want to share as coaches. So someone had asked, if an athlete is standing at their starting mark and they take a leaning step back. So what I'm envisioning in this, when you ask Aaron Martin, what I'm envisioning is almost like an athlete doing kind of a lean back, like high jumpers do a lot. Is that kind of what you were referring to?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to. And like I was saying, and I would do it in high school. I would do it like 2 or 3 times. And honestly, I think it just came from watching older athletes and upperclassmen do it. But I did it every time ever since I started doing it, like the rest of my high school career. And it helped out so much with my rhythm. But I just didn't know if that was considered like a walk-in or just straight up static or start.
I personally would call that kind of a moderate static, right? And I had an athlete that did this a couple of years ago. He came to us from another school. He had always done kind of a walk-in and was very inconsistent. And I'm like, so you like motion, but you were inconsistent. That's what you're telling me. And he's like, yes. And I'm like, okay, so this is what we're going to do. How about we have kind of a mixture where you can have that step back. Some kids like to do the step back because it has a stretch feel to it. Kind of helps them to feel like they're, preparing their legs properly for the drive that's about to happen. And so he started doing that step back to almost kind of stretch out, if you will. And then he would get down in a crouch start, which is the picture to this beginning. That's what a crouch start looks like. And then he would go. So it was kind of like putting two of those things together in one. And I wouldn't necessarily call that a walk-in, but walk-ins generally, in my opinion, are, movements that happen prior to, a starting, like a starting spot, like a position on the lane that you want to start your run. You walk to that point and then start sprinting. That's what I would think, at least in my definition, a walk-in would be, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Of course. Let me see here. So Casey, if you guys, is there anyone else that wants to share anything here? We can, I can give Casey the floor again. That's kind of the format is, we share in the chat some ideas, and then we as coaches communicate with one another and collaborate openly, and then Casey can share, and then I'll share a slide that I made. So does anyone else want to share anything else before Casey gets to talk about this point? And she mentioned that I did a video for her going into state, and it really helped her, which is awesome. You had a great state that year, so good. But is everyone good? Are we good to move on to see what Casey says about the approach?
I just want to like add a couple more approaches that I've seen.
Please.
Not I don't really have a lot of personal opinion on them, but like I have some fair amount of like international experience. Like I've seen that like Cuban jumpers have like these crazy starts, like this kind of like they might do like 2 skips, and then their run might only be literally like 12 steps or something like that, because they did like all these skips beforehand.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that's a great thing, but if you're jumping, you know, you're top 10 in the world, like maybe there's something to it. I don't know. Another thing that I saw that Ivan Pedroso's crew does, or at least that's what he did when he jumped, and what like Yulimar Rojas does, for instance, is they do this like kind of like a soft start. When I say soft, what I mean, it's like they do it like soft pushes, and then like maybe after like the 4th step, it's like in a really aggressive push into like their full run. It's like really subtle, but it's interesting. I think they just like do like 4 little pushes to a mark, and then like really heavy pushes, and then like transition into their full run, which I thought was like pretty interesting. But again, I don't have like reasonings behind why you would do one or the other in particular. It's something just to think about.
Cameron, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I've noticed that as well with the Caribbean jumpers, and I don't have much to say about that either, because that's just, it's just kind of a curiosity to me. But what Rojas does, I have had athletes do that as well, and it's just, and like what Aaron was saying a little while ago about the 0 step, because I use that same terminology. As long as they hit the 0 step, and it's a little bit less demand for them to push, because some kids don't really understand, or they can't execute the pushing aspect of the acceleration phase as well. So it just takes a little bit of that demand off of them. So it just makes it easier, for lack of a better term. So
yeah. So I had a couple thoughts when you guys were sharing about these different competitive styles, or group styles, or team styles, I should say. The skip in, where there's big skips and a short approach, maybe they're preparing their legs for takeoff. Who knows? Maybe because they're just getting themselves bouncy, ready to go. Who knows? One thing I can say, and I'll share this when we get to my screen, is high school athletes don't even touch that, right? Like that's not even something that we should, in my personal opinion, even begin to think about. But when you get to that high school, or that collegiate and pro level like style of things, it's basically whatever works for them, right? As long as they're being consistent and they've built a routine of some sort, I'm good with whatever, like honest to goodness. And I want athletes to have a say in how they do things, generally speaking. Like for instance, this year I had 2 athletes that came in and they had trained with another jumps coach I know, and they were taught to do the waterfall start. And if you're not familiar with that, you basically stand on your tippy toes, you fall forward, and when you're at an optimal angle, much like the blocks, you start the drive phase and push hard. And when they came in, I told them I used to do that start, and I didn't think it was probably going to be appropriate, but I asked them right away, in the competitions you did with this coach, how was your consistency? Were you hitting the board? Were you scratching? Were you, way behind the board and losing big gobs of distance? And they said yes. And so I said, listen, this is what we're going to do then. I'm going to teach you the static start, the crouch start. You're going to do that. And if it doesn't feel right, if you're not hitting the board, then we can talk a little bit more and maybe try this waterfall thing again. But I'm going to tell you right now, I think personally that if you were inconsistent in that start, if you give this a shot, you might see a little bit of a difference. But again, that's only at the high school level, where I don't want them doing, crazy skip-ins or a soft push, if you will. But at those higher levels, there's a lot of different beliefs out there, right? And so no, and I know you weren't, Aaron. I know you were just putting that out there. I just saw your thing in the chat. So yeah, I just wanted to just let you know from my own personal opinion that those things are definitely something that can be used at that higher end level. And it's basically, as long as they can be consistent at the board, they could literally like moonwalk down that lane if they want to, right? Like, honest to God, if they're going to have enough speed at that board, they can do whatever the heck they want as long as they're, doing the right things at the board and being consistent. So, whatever. That's my
I,
soapbox.
I like to err more on the side of simplicity myself,
Yeah.
And because I think the more the athlete's thinking about, am I on or is my push correct, the less they're thinking about jumping far. So I want the focus to be jump as far as run as fast as you can under control at the board and jump as far as you can. But if I'm thinking about other stuff, that's divided attention skill. And the minute that jumping becomes a divided attention skill, it becomes a less efficient skill. But that's just my opinion.
Great. Okay. So Casey, why don't you go ahead and just kind of share your thoughts on the start in general and just kind of whatever comes to mind here, the things you wrote down. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in my high school career and college too, I still do this today. I remember way at the beginning seeing, I was a freshman, watching seniors do, every once in a while I would see somebody do like a skip in, or, I did see some people do waterfall starts, and I kind of tried them, not too extensively, but I always preferred a static start. And I know that I also always preferred shorter approaches. So it was really important to get up to my top speed as fast as I could. And it really helped me to get that momentum going. If I started same crouch start as you saw one of the last pictures with Peyton Sear in it, that's how I do my starts. And I always have it so that when I start, my head is down, and I put all of my weight on my forward foot, my left foot. And then I usually, sort of for nerve, sort of personal preference, I do like staying still, but I still move. I tap my right foot in the behind me in the lane before I dig it into the ground and start my approach. I keep leaning forward as long as I can, not artificially. You don't want to have your shoulders down the whole way down the runway, but keeping my eyes more or less down. Usually my approach in high school, my approach was about 60 feet long. It was 12 steps, and because I could get up to top speed really quickly. And it helps to have my eyes on the board when I started, eyes slightly down, so that my head is slightly down, so my shoulders are slightly down, so I can focus on being aggressive. And that was just my style as I did it. I know you guys were mentioning different starts that you've seen. I've seen quite a few being at all of the meets I've been at, and especially a lot more in college. I would agree. High schoolers, for the most part, stuck to the static starts. But when I got to college, some of the teams we competed against, I saw people skipping in from a long ways away. There's a guy on one of the teams in our conference. We call him Skipper because of it. We've got Jazz Hands guy. He goes to Oshkosh. He leans back and he does something with his hands under his chin, and then he leans forward and he's doing almost the splits when he starts because his feet are really, really far apart. But he leans back and then he leans forward, and then he like does the same kind of things like by his feet. And then he leans back again and he leans forward again before he starts. And it is the most interesting show to watch. He's also one of the more notable people who clap for themselves, and like they start the clap before their approach, and then he does his routine, and it makes it all the funnier when he scratches because it's a huge show. And he's not always the most consistent, but he is a really great jumper despite it. I've seen people who squat almost all the way down to the ground and you have to, the people standing behind them in line had to give them like 8 feet of clearance because they would, you know, lunge backwards farther than anybody expects them to. But I've seen quite a bit of everything, and I've noticed that the more extravagant the start is, the more inconsistent they are, and the more complications that can happen. I know for me personally, if I have anything extra like that to think about, it messes me up because sometimes, you know, like the wind will blow and like push me to the side right as I start, or, you know, something, or I'll think, you know, as I start my approach, even, you know, coming out of it, like it was static, it was good. But my first step might feel a little bit long. So then I start thinking like, was that a good step? Was that a good start? Should I be, you know, taking quicker steps now? Should I make up for it by taking a quick short step? Like that's all in my head while I'm going down the runway. And that doesn't do a whole lot of good for me by the time I get to the board. So I think the fewer distractions, the better. And that's just my take on it after having done it for a couple years. And I really think that it's important to keep the focus on it because, like, the less the athlete has to think about, the better. Judging from my experience and all of the teammates that I've had, that will finish a jump, they'll scratch it, and they'll come back and they're like, wow, did you see I kind of like slipped out of the start there? And, you know, it's like smaller things like that. So I think the more consistent they are at the start, you know, just talking about doing the same thing every time, keeping it simple, keeping it, you know, effective. I think that's what matters the most when they actually get to the board. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Casey. I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously, we've done a lot of work together in this area of, you know, starts and just jumping in general. So here's my thought, guys. I feel like we're on the same page, a lot of us, which, to be fully honest, I'm really, really happy about. I am obsessed with the start. Like I mentioned when I began, I was told to do a waterfall from another coach I knew, and my kids were wildly inconsistent and they were questioning themselves, and I was new to coaching, and so I didn't know how to get them on that board, and it was just a mess. We were all over the place. And so for those first couple of years, I really struggled, and I studied my butt off, and I came across the crouch start. And when I found it and saw the comparables between a kid coming out of the blocks and realized that, hey, if they're going to be working on block motions anyway, let's make something that looks and feels like that as a start in the jump. Maybe we can create some kind of consistency here. We can, you know, build some more comfort and understanding. And since I switched to the crouch start, my athletes, I don't have percentages, but my athletes are probably hitting boards, I don't know, 80+% of the time, I would think. And with a group as large as ours, you know, that's a huge accomplishment, in my own personal opinion. I'm biased, obviously, but so I just simply say the less movement, the better, at the high school level. I will explain the waterfall here in just a moment, Aaron. I say use crouch start. I have gone to the state meet ever since I decided to change my belief to the crouch start. I went to state and I started really watching the athletes to see what was going on there because, like I said, I was starting to become very passionate about the start at that time. And it was crazy. I mean, there was kids that were doing these monstrous, like, you know, skip-ins, jog-ins with sprints. It was all over the board. And I can remember there's this one kid, and I can't remember what year it was, but he only hit one board in prelims, and he started like crazy. And he won the whole thing and never hit a board in finals. Now, if he hadn't stuttered and he hadn't been just so worried about the board, like he could have probably broke the state record at that time. And it all was because he was a big skip in, weird, like dance. Like it was the weirdest start ever. And like that really stuck with me because someone just looked at this kid and said, "You're a gift. Like, go out and just win any meet you want because you're so good at this and you're strong and you're bouncy and you were made to triple jump." But they never actually sat with the kid, in my personal opinion anyway, and showed him how to start properly. Had they, this kid could have been even more special, in my opinion, than he really was because of that less movement at the beginning and that control. And so that's when my passion really for the crouch start really started growing at that state meet that year, seeing this. We did talk about high school versus collegiate or beyond college actually as well. High school, less movement, just make it as easy on them as possible. Don't give them a billion different things to think about. In college, if they want to change some things, or their coaches in college or pro coaches have some other ideas, then maybe that's what they do. Then they open that up a little bit more. But in high school, no. And then when Casey was talking, she talked about how she talked about her front foot in the start, her left foot. And I thought that was great because I actually do everything I can to ensure that my own athletes determine their starting foot or the foot that's in front. Because I think a lot of coaches, now, we can talk about this as well if you guys have any questions after this, or comments. I think a lot of coaches just tell their athletes to put their strongest foot forward or their jump foot forward because they feel it's going to be the strongest push off for the beginning of the approach. And I like kids just to be comfortable. So I have them try this with the left foot forward, see what it feels like. Try this with the right foot forward, see what it feels like. Which one do you prefer? And then we go to the next step of assigning number of steps for the kids and all that. But in the crouch start, I want them coming out as hard as possible. And, the approaches are never going to be super long. So in theory, they're not going to get tired, at least hopefully. And so those are just kind of the things that I strongly believe in when it comes to the starts. Now, Aaron, you asked to explain the waterfall a little bit more. And what I can do here is maybe try to find a waterfall video online on YouTube and attach it to this document. So if you come back to this later, you can see that. But again, ultimately, it's a kid standing in their spot. They go up on their tippy toes like 2 or 3 different times just to kind of stretch out the tippy toes and so on. And then they just lean forward and allow themselves to fall forward until there's a certain angle at which they catch themselves and begin to sprint with big arm actions, powerful knees, all that. And the idea is that you're going to hit the same angle you would if you are coming out of blocks or if you're starting like a crouch start. The problem, though, that I realized, the biggest issue, and you're right, it is a bad idea in my opinion as well, the biggest issue was that consistency of how far that first step would go. So sometimes kids would catch themselves way too early and their step would be a foot less than it was supposed to be to hit that, perfect first step mark, if you will. And so that threw everything off then. Now they're behind the board, coming down the lane. They've got to reach a little bit when they get to the board. That puts them in a compromised position. There's a lot of different things there. But I can definitely try to find a video and attach it to this document. I'll write myself a note right now so you can kind of see that visually after we're done tonight. Anybody have any other things? My thoughts are this has already gone roughly about an hour. So to be fully honest, I would love for you guys to come back next week. I mean, we can still, if you have any questions, talk about the start, but I know it being a Friday night, people have families to spend time with and so on. I was hoping it'd be right around an hour, maybe a little bit more than that, but not by much. But if you notice, the next time we have one of these, and again, I'm planning every Friday, 6:30 Central Time. The next thing we could go over is the long approach versus the triple approach, the similarities and differences there, because I think that's a really, really, really important topic. Because I'm not sure people understand maybe the differences between them, or in your opinions, if there are differences between them. So that's something I would love to discuss. But does anybody have any other questions or anything they want to share before we shut this down for a week and then maybe come back next week to discuss what I just showed you? Anyone want to share anything out before we go? Okay. In general, did you guys like this format? You can use the chat to convey your thoughts or whatever. Did you like this format? Would you rather we have a different format? I'm open to any suggestions because I want all of you to come back week to week if you're available, and us to grow together, and really,
Yeah.
really have this be good.
Cool.
So, Aaron, having topics and then opening it up to coaches.
Yeah, just basically how we did it tonight.
Oh, so you liked it?
Yeah. It was
Awesome. Okay.
Yep.
So Cameron, you said that you're interested in hearing or seeing everyone or the thoughts on this. I'm actually recording this right now using Screencastify. So what I'm hoping to do is upload this video as well into this document each week. And there might even be a way, I think, through Zoom to get an audio version of this as well. So if someone wants to listen to it while they're driving or something like that, like Audible. So I'm going to try to get a couple different formats of this up into this document here, so that even if you guys do miss something, you're still able to see what we discussed and hear, some thoughts and opinions and so on. So awesome. Cool. So if you could, guys, I'd really appreciate it. If you could go to longandtriple.com, click on this link. It'll bring you right to this document, and then just go to the third slide here and go to the survey. Once you take the survey, tonight we only covered the first question. So when you go in, if you want to, you're more than welcome to, but I think we should probably save it. My suggestion would be to only do the first question. You can look at the other ones, but email address, is it okay if people contact you? And then different start styles, anything that you want to share in there tonight, any additional topics, or maybe the things that you shared already, you want to just type out, you're more than welcome to, and then submit. And then I also put in there that we will be able to see, obviously, one another's answers here. That is also right here, LinkedIn as well. So I think that's about it. It was a pleasure. If you enjoyed this format and enjoyed it tonight, please spread the word to as many coaches as possible. I want this thing to grow. 8 coaches or 8 participants in this is great. But I would love to see, 20 plus, 30 plus at some point. That's the hope. That's the dream. So we can really lean on one another and build during this, kind of weird time, if you will. So, definitely. Perfect. So you guys have a great holiday weekend. Sorry, what was that, Coach?
Thank you for hosting.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Have a great night, everyone, and have a great weekend and be safe.